Budget 2019 was all about strategies to build a strong, united Singapore. And tonight, we'll be trying to unpack some of those key strategies. And Minister Heng, you'll be with me this evening as we look at some of the key announcements that you've made yesterday. Two of them have been generating quite a bit of buzz. The Merdeka Generation Package.
Yes.
The other one is the bicentennial bonus.
Right.
From there, we're going to go on to efforts that will help keep Singapore's economy thriving. And of course, how to make all that spending sustainable, making sure that we only spend what we can afford. So, Minister, on that note, let's start off with that $6.1 billion Merdeka Generation Package.
Sure. Yeah.
Some of these people here, and indeed at home, are going to find the sound of it rather familiar, because back in 2014, we had something called the Pioneer Generation Package.
That's right. Yeah.
Let's talk about the thinking that went behind the Merdeka Generation Package and what some of the key differences are between Merdeka Generation Package as well as the PGP.
Well, first of all, the Merdeka generation is a younger generation. They were born, between 1950 to 59. Yeah. So it is a younger generation, and it is also a generation that is more active. In fact, about half of them are still working. So the emphasis in the Merdeka Generation Package is to help this group of younger seniors to stay active, healthy, and engaged in the community. There are elements which are similar to the Pioneer Generation Package, in particular assurance for healthcare and the various elements of it. But the main thinking is that it is a generation that came up during our early years. Even they were born before even Singapore was independent. So it is a generation that has helped to build Singapore, went into national service, built a multicultural, multi-religious society, and we would like to show our appreciation and to honor them.
Well, with things such as the Pioneer Generation Package, the Merdeka Generation Package, I mean, when we had the Pioneer Generation Package,
yes,
we had people who didn't quite meet the criteria saying that, hey, what about me? I'm being left out. Now we have the Merdeka Generation Package to sort of fill that gap.
Yes.
And then we've got people then who are saying that, hey, what about me? I'm younger than that. I'm not going to be able to qualify. And I think we have a question from the crowd tonight that bears elements of that. It's Cheng Ming Hui. He's 27 years old, and he has a question for the Minister. Go ahead.
Oh, hi, Minister.
Hi.
Ming Hui here. Okay, my question is this. With the Merdeka Generation Package, it feels like this year's budget is really catered a bit more towards the elderly. I was just wondering, could there have been space catered, carved out of the budget for the other generations, like I said? Yep.
Well, actually, the budget covers the large groups of Singaporeans. But first, let me say that it is not possible in one budget to cover everyone in Singapore. What this budget seeks to do, and what every budget seeks to do, is to address issues of priority. Because we must not look at a budget from a year-to-year basis and say, well, this year there's this package and this other year there's that package. Because many of the things that I announced this year, for instance, will go on for many years. The Merdeka Generation Package, for instance, will last us about 30 years because it's a Merdeka generation that is younger. So we have to see budget from year to year and look at how it is building up over time. So in earlier years, in other years, I have packages for school children, for baby bonuses and so on. So every package, every year's budget builds upon previous year's budget. And in fact, so that's the first point. Second, there is actually a number of things for younger people in this package. So for instance, for the younger ones like yourself, the emphasis on upgrading, on training, it is quite a whole range of training programs that our young people can aspire to. The program on how we send young people into the region to do internship to learn. Yeah. And then, of course, for those who are just slightly younger than the Merdeka generation, we have the MediSave contribution for them to encourage them to also save up for old age. So there is quite a number of measures for other groups as well.
So sounds like there's something for everyone almost. But then again, there is that view, perhaps even among those from the Merdeka generation, that perhaps it just isn't enough. And I think we have another guest, Dr. Ng Wai Chong, who would like to ask a question on that front. Dr. Ng is from the Tsao Foundation. He's also a community doctor who cares for the frail elderly. Dr. Ng.
Minister, I'd like to bring up the healthcare needs of the frail seniors. And it's not just about having diabetes or high blood pressure, but it's the impact of these conditions resulting in dementia, frailty, disability, and with very stressed caregivers. And so I'm just wondering whether does the Minister have any plans to help family doctors like myself to take care of complex seniors like them holistically? So I'm just wondering this question.
I think Dr. Ng also brought up a very interesting point in the sense that we are talking about things like cognitive issues, mental illness, that perhaps haven't been targeted, as far as I'm aware, as specifically, when we're talking about Merdeka
So
generation.
the CHAS subsidies and so on hasn't quite really covered sufficiently. So it's about funding primary care properly, so sufficiently. So that's my question.
Well, the Minister for Health will be touching more on what we can do to support our people as we age. And in fact, I had many discussions with him, including what we can do starting from the very young people, because it's very important for us to have an active, healthy lifestyle when young, and then it builds up on the various, over the years. And at the same time, as you know, Minister Gan has launched a war on diabetes. So there are many of these very common conditions which, with good lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, an active lifestyle, we can prevent the onset of this. And there are also new trials that are going on. So for instance, you mentioned about dementia. I was at the Hot Park the other day, and they are doing a project with NUH to look at how even activities like gardening can have important effects on keeping ourselves healthy, mentally healthy and physically healthy. So we have to look at this whole range of things that we can do. And at the same time, Minister Gan and I started this community network for seniors. We piloted it. And in the community network for seniors, most of our residents live in HDB estates. And the void decks of HDB estate provide a very good place to have a little coffee corner. And I've interacted with many of our seniors who have gone to these coffee corners and kept themselves very active and healthy. So those are the things that I think we should continue to discuss, because aging has many dimensions and we must do our best to prepare our people for it.
Minister, I'd like to pick up on that point on healthy lifestyles, because, and bringing it back to the budget, Merdeka package does seem to carry an emphasis on healthcare.
Yes.
We have, of course, that top up, that the Passion Silver Card, amount that goes into that. But people, part of the Merdeka generation that perhaps aren't unhealthy, are perhaps healthy and active, are thinking, hey, but I don't quite benefit from this package. And on that front, we've got a question from Mr. Ko Dre Ming. He's from RSVP Singapore, and that's an organization that encourages seniors to volunteer. And that's something that you mentioned in the budget as well.
Yes, indeed.
Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
During your this budget speech, you mentioned that the government moved towards providing more opportunities for active aging, and also with the corporates and the community partners, right, to build more vibrant activities for the senior. And together, we hope that with this opportunity, the senior can retire with a purpose. Having said that, right, Minister, would the government consider, right, giving incentive or even top up the skill future credits for senior to retrain, to reskill themselves, or PCP, Professional Conversion Program, for them to come in and work in the social sector, whereby we have, less people wanting to do the job, right? And also maybe to go further.
And to build up social capital.
Yeah, social capital of Singapore. The senior will be the social capital. At the same time, help them, to live a healthy lifestyle.
Yes.
Minister?
Well, thank you. I think first, let me commend many of our groups like RSVP and Seniors Group that are encouraging our seniors to really stay active. I participated in some of RSPP activities, and I know what you all are doing is very meaningful. So please continue with these great efforts.
Thank you, sir.
Now, as to your question on what we can do, there is a tripartite work group that I mentioned in the budget, and they are doing the work to address some of these issues, including healthcare issues and the concerns of seniors. So please take part in this, give your feedback to this, and we'll consider all this to see how we can keep our seniors even more actively engaged.
All right, Minister, thanks very much for that, as well as your questions, everyone. I'm sure there'll be plenty more to flesh out in the coming days with regard to the Merdeka Generation Package. We're going for a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be talking about another hot topic, and that, of course, is the bicentennial bonus. So stay with us for that. Welcome back to this post-budget town hall with Finance Minister Heng Keat. Thanks very much for being here tonight. Now, earlier we spoke about that $6.1 billion Merdeka Generation Package. Now we go to the other policy that has got plenty of tongues wagging. We're talking about the bicentennial bonus, of course, the $1.1 billion worth of that. And if you look at it, it does look pretty comprehensive, Minister. You've got things ranging from GST vouchers, rebates for HDB conservancy charges, education grants as well. But as with most things, Minister, people are going to compare. And they're going to be looking at something that came with another national milestone, SG50, that happened back in 2015. Terence Wong has a question on that, and he heads a fund management company. Terence?
Good evening, Minister Terence. I look at the budget, it's very, very comprehensive, but there were a few glaring omissions. I mean, chief of which I believe was the sandwich class. And if you compare against SG50, there are a lot of difference. And I believe that, with the cost of living rising over the last few years, I believe that greater consideration can be given to this group of people. And on another separate note, since I'm talking about glaring omissions, I think that, I've been following your speeches over since 2016. Every year you'll be talking about property, but this year there was no mention of property at all. So I'd just like to hear your views on this.
Well, first, your second question is straightforward in that, I have fairly long-term planning on various things that we need to do. And you cannot have in one budget hit 10 targets at one time, right? So you will have to just choose what are the key things that we need to do. And that, we have just implemented cooling measures and HDB is expanding its program. So Minister Lawrence Wong will be speaking more on this in the MND's COS. Now back to your question on the cost of living issue. Now, in the case for cost of living, it's important that we try and keep the cost of living affordable for our people. And there are a few things that we do. First and foremost is that we operate a very open, competitive system. We import from all over the world. And in fact, I've been encouraging all our importers to source for the best possible products from all over the world. I was very surprised recently when I visited FairPrice that they were importing from so many different countries. So we have the choices, we have the variety, and that we can get the best, from different parts of the world. So that's the first thing. Two is that if we keep our economy strong, in fact, our Singapore dollar has been appreciating. And those of you, who are traveling or who are shopping overseas will know that things are getting, that it's a lot affordable because the Sing dollar is strong. But when you are at home, the fact that the Sing dollar is strong also helps us in the cost of living, because what it means is that imported goods are now cheaper when translated into Sing dollar. The third, we try to get our shops, to compete. In fact, because we run such an open system, we have no tariff on any of our imports. So it means that we can buy from all over the world at zero tariff, and the shops here compete among themselves to source for the best. I noticed that the competition is quite strong. Every day when you look at the papers, there are all kinds of deals that different chains are offering. And in the case of FairPrice, they have this 1,000 everyday products, low prices list. And so for this basket of 1,000 products, they will keep the prices competitive as a way, in fact, the lowest in that basket, as a way of performing their duty as a social enterprise. So when you look at this, this in turn is generating a lot of competition in the other chains. So I think those are very important ways for us to keep the cost of living affordable. But I think so this bicentennial bonus has elements that help our household. It's an additional source of help over and above what we already have in the form of service and conservancy rebates, over and above the GST vouchers and so on.
So I'd like to bring your attention to another point of comparison, if I may, between bicentennial bonus and SG50. I mean, if you recall, SG50, we had that marriage and parenthood package that has been very popular. People always look at it, especially in view of Singapore's low total fertility rate.
Yes.
I think that benefits to families always on the radar for Singaporeans. We've got a guest with us tonight. Her name is ROSHNI MAHTANI. She is a mother of one, and we understand she has some suggestions. ROSHNI, take it away.
Thank you, Minister, for having the dialogue with us today. So, as he mentioned, when we celebrated our Jubilee year, we announced the Jubilee Motherhood and Parenthood and Marriage Package, which was great. But this year, we didn't have such announcements. But at the same time, if you look at from our birth rates from 2017, we are at the 7th-year lowest in the last few years. Is there anything that we're doing to try to increase the birth rate of Singapore, because we're nowhere close to replacement level? And at the Asian Parent, we have a couple of suggestions, such as what Hungary recently did, which is permanent exemption of taxes for working moms with more than 3 or 4 children. Or, for example, no COE for larger cars for people with kids. Are these feasible suggestions? And is there anything that we're doing to try to ease the burden for both parents as well as try to increase our birth rates?
And just to set the context, I think the latest fertility figures that we have right now is, I think we are hovering at 1.16.
That's right.
For the latest at 2017. The year that you mentioned was 1.25, I think, in 2014 and 2015, thereabouts. So it is quite a gap that we have. Minister, you'd like to take Roshni's question?
Yes. Roshni, well, first, congratulations on your first child. So I hope that you're planning to have many more. And in fact, this afternoon, I just met a whole group of people, and I say, please encourage, for the young people in this room, please have more kids. And that for those of you who are likely to be grandparents, please encourage your children to have more kids too. So it is indeed a very important issue for us, because our fertility rate is coming down, and we hope to really support our young parents in this. Now, earlier on I mentioned that we cannot have in every budget address 100% of all the things that we need to do. Year by year we'll have to do. And in fact, we have over the years a whole range of support for our young couples to have more children, starting from the baby bonus and the whole child development account, and that alone is worth about $18,000 per child. And when our primary schools and secondary schools are almost free, and when our children go into the IHLs, whether it's the ITE, polys or university, the subsidies ranges from 75 to 90%. So it is a very significant support for for developing our children over time. So I do hope that we make full use of all of this. But what is very important is that all the support that we give is really a form of encouragement and support. Most important is that we must feel that it's important for us to have children. And it is not easy, because when you look at the trends in all the developed economies, in fact, the fertility rate has also been coming down very significantly, even Asian societies. And it is something that we are, in a way, working hard to reverse this. But a fundamental change in our mindset is important, and we will do what is needed to help our young couples. And we're looking at, for instance, when I was in the Ministry of Education, we started the MOE kindergartens, and to look at how we can develop our young children even better. So I think we have also increased our preschool spending significantly.
So one of the fundamental things as well, I believe many in the audience would attest to, especially those at home, as well as those at home, is the notion that cost of living, again, comes back into this equation about raising a family, making sure that they can provide for this family, not just starting one, but maintaining one. Right. And in many cases, a lot of these families also have older folk within these households. So we've got a question from Mazli Syed. He's got a question about cost of living and trying to manage this when it comes to maintaining the family.
Good evening, Mr. Heng. Okay. The bicentennial package, right, it has been generous, but for middle-income families like us, right, like mine, okay, the cost of living is quite hurt, okay, a bit hurt, and the cost of living, like cost of expenses like transport, food, has been rising. So my question is, can the government absorb GST for essential items like food, like what have been done for healthcare and also the education?
Minister.
Okay, thank you.
Well, this was very carefully studied before we even introduced GST. And I took a look at it again recently when this was discussed. And I've been looking at the experiences of countries all over. And you find that countries that seek to differentiate different items, and these are essential, these are not essential, first end up with a big quarrel about, is this essential, is this not essential? And second, it actually is it ends up being very distortionary, because whether, in fact, the better off family, when they consume more, we also collect more GST. And in the case of our families that need support, we have the GST voucher. One very important thing to bear in mind is that for families in the lowest 20% of household income, they get $4 of benefits for every dollar of taxes that they pay. And for many of those families, the main taxes that they pay is GST. The main taxes is GST and maybe some small amount of others, but it's mainly the GST. So in fact, they're actually getting more back by this scheme. And even for the middle segment, the 40 to 60th percentile, that means the median group, they get $2 of benefits for every dollar of taxes that they pay. So by keeping our system simple, in fact, we do not incur unnecessary administrative costs. We do not cause confusion. Everybody pays the same amount for everything that we purchase, but different families get different forms of rebates, vouchers and so on.
Essentially,
and we think that is
targeted support.
Is very much better targeted and much more effective.
Minister, thanks very much for that answer, and I imagine it's something that will come up in future as well with GST going up
certainly,
in the coming years.
And I also announced a number of measures that we will be taking in order to absorb the impact of this higher GST.
Right. We've got to go for a short break now. We have to interrupt the conversation, but when we come back, we've got the business community who will be putting their questions to you, Minister. So those at home, please stay tuned for that. Welcome back to this special town hall with Finance Minister Heng Keat. Minister, we've covered some ground already. We're about half an hour through our program, but we've really focused on individuals. So I'd like to turn your attention to the economy. This is something that's close to the hearts of many Singaporeans and Singapore as well. And in fact, something that you highlight rather often is economic restructuring and the importance of this in today's age. Sometimes, though, companies will feel some pain as part of this restructuring. So on that note, I want to bring Stephen Yee from the Singapore National Employers Federation. He has a question about the changes to foreign worker policy, which you talked about in yesterday's budget. Stephen.
Good evening, Minister.
Hi, good evening, Stephen.
It's regarding the foreign workers quota on the services sector, which you mentioned in the budget. As we are aware, we are trying to get companies to transform themselves. And I think quite a lot of them are looking at it seriously, but it takes time to happen sometimes. So with a reduction in the workers' quota for the services sector, which cover a lot of SMEs, my worry is they will end up concentrating on how to solve that problem, and probably may also affect their expansion plans as well. So what do you think, sir?
Well, I think we have to look at the expansion plan of the company and in fact the restructuring of the companies together with the workers' policy. I visited a number of companies, including smaller ones, bigger ones, and what I found in common is that the companies which have been successful in transforming itself do not just buy a machine and say, "Well, I transform myself," but they also take the trouble to train workers, to reskill workers, to make sure that as the company upgrades, our workers upgrade. And as I said in the budget, stronger companies give better job prospects for our workers. More productive, more skillful workers help the companies to be stronger. So this mutually reinforcing link is very important. So I know it is not easy for us to just restructure, but my concern is that if we do not act now, we will be storing up problems for the future. So it is like, there are two roads. There's an easy road, but the easy road will end up hitting a brick wall a few years down the road. There's a harder road, but if we were to go through this harder road, we'll reach our destination. And we will look at how we can help our companies. That's why I mentioned about how we are changing the whole enterprise financing scheme, so there is one stop. In fact, we have merged IE Singapore and Spring Singapore to be Enterprise Singapore, one stop. So I think we need to do it in a way that allows us to tackle transformation in a holistic way and not do bits and pieces here and there. So I know it's difficult, but if we go through this difficult journey, I think we will come out stronger.
Another thing that I think resonates very much with viewers as well as those here is the situation surrounding older workers, Minister. In fact, I think this is something that you touched on yesterday as well in laying out policy in budget. Several policies we've already seen on this front. I think you've extended the career support program, which basically incentivizes companies to rehire older workers. Michael Tan is here with us tonight. He's a part of this older workforce. He's 66 years old, still working. He'd like to ask you a question.
Very good. Heng. Good evening. The budget has included various schemes for senior citizens like myself to remain part of the workforce for longer. So the re-employment permits us to work up to 67. So my question is, can the government consider raising the age beyond 67 for those who wish to work for longer? Thank you.
And just to clarify, this isn't just about raising the retirement age. It's about making sure that those who want to work aren't taken advantage of, I think is what Michael is referring to.
Well, Michael, that's a very, very good question. And in fact, that's why I mentioned about the tripartite work group on older workers, looking at the concerns of older workers. And they'll be looking into this very seriously to look at what we can do. I think it's very laudable that you would like to stay active and engaged. And you're also part of the Merdeka generation. So as I mentioned earlier, it's important for our Merdeka generation to stay active, engaged, and looking at how we can enable our Merdeka generation and older workers to continue working is also a very important part of what we hope to do. And we need to study this carefully to see what are the practical things that we can do to enable our seniors to continue to stay active. And I would say that staying active is very important. We are also staying healthy.
Yeah. Right. I think on a wider scale, this economic restructuring effort requires buy-in not just from workers like Michael. It requires a lot of buy-in from businesses as well. We touched upon that a little bit earlier.
Indeed.
And innovation is something that is quite close to your heart. It's something that you've talked about quite a bit. So our next question will come from Anurag AVULA. He's an entrepreneur. And he wants to know about a couple of new initiatives that Minister, you announced yesterday.
Right.
Anurag.
Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
I think in the budget, you emphasize the need for startups to scale, to thrive.
Right.
With that, you've announced this Scale Up Singapore as well as the Innovation Agents program. How would that apply to young companies on top of the existing programs that are already in place, which Singapore does a great job of, I must add?
On top. So are you making use of the existing, some of the existing programs?
Absolutely, quite well.
Which are the ones that you found most
So we look at the Global Corporate Company Partnership Program, the PIC as well, and some of the grants as well. And we're also part of the Seeds Capital initiative as well. So
you're part of the Seeds Capital.
Yes.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well, so we do have. It's good that our startup system is becoming more vibrant, and that many of our startups are growing nicely. So the next stage is to help them scale up, and in the scale up process, we are looking at a number of initiatives. I mentioned this co-investment fund program, co-investment 3, and this is one way that we're helping our startups here to scale up. The other is looking at enterprise financing, and instead of looking at financing for A or B or C, it is now merged into one scheme for which Enterprise Singapore will administer and work together with our banks and our finance companies to look at how we can help our startups. We have also had this Global Innovation Alliance that allows our startups to get into overseas markets, particularly those that are trying to explore the market and to also meet up with other entrepreneurs in those very vibrant startup community. And in that way, we can build linkages. And do join us for this year's Switch, which is the Singapore Week of Innovation and Technology, which we are combining with our Singapore FinTech Festival. And in that way, we can bring all the exciting startups that are focusing on innovation, on technology, on venturing out into the region to come together to explore how they can work together. Yeah. And for the venture capital funds, the private equity funds, to also join us in this journey. I've seen how this smart capital, I'll call them, come together to look at how they can help our startups to scale and to get into the global networks.
Minister, I just have a question, follow-up question to Anurag's. You mentioned Switch as well as Singapore FinTech Festival. And it seems that we're really going big on this front. How do you think this places Singapore in moving forward? Also in terms of adoption, because that's key, isn't it, in this move towards digital?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll say that first, the digital technology will have a very significant impact on almost every sector in the economy. Whether it is an old economy sector, so-called like construction, where they are now using building information management system and integrated digital delivery to look at how we can do construction. Even the food company, I gave 2 examples of food company that have used R&D and to innovate new products. So indeed, innovation will be a very key part of our work. And next month, we will be having our Research, Innovation and Enterprise Council meeting. And we will be having a press conference after that. And I will touch a bit more on what we can do on the innovation front. I think we are very well placed to make full use of technology, because first and foremost, our entrepreneurs are getting into that area. They have exciting ideas. Our R&D in the universities are growing very nicely and in A-Star. And our workers and our unions are also very open to change. And this is important. When I visited FairPrice to look at what FairPrice was doing with this automated storage and retrieval system, it really speeds up the work in terms of, speeds up the way in which goods are packed together for delivery to consumers and to their shops. It's a huge change. So I spoke to the workers because I was concerned whether the workers were taken care of. And indeed, they have been very well taken care of throughout this journey. And in the process, they train the workers to learn and upgrade, and they get a better job and a more pleasant working environment as well. So I believe that we are in a very, very good position to make use of this.
Certainly exciting times ahead on that front. Minister, we've got 3 more big questions for you, but we're going for a short break now. When we come back, Minister has announced billions of dollars worth of giveaways. But the question remains, how are we going to fund all of this? The answers when we return. welcome back. We are chatting with Finance Minister Heng Keat, really unpacking the facts and figures surrounding Budget 2019. Minister, this budget has been described as expansionary. Some have called it generous. But really, you expect to log a deficit of $3.5 billion for this budget. You've also warned that you have to spend within your means, meaning you have to be fiscally prudent.
Right.
Professor Annie Koh, this is a concern that you share with Minister as well. Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you. Good evening, Minister. Happy Yuan Xiao Jie. Yes, and to all our audience here. My question is, you actually mentioned that for future lumpy infrastructure projects, we may have to resort to borrowing.
Yes.
And of course, that will instill fiscal discipline. And it would also help that the government is going to issue a guarantee, so that will bring the cost down.
Right.
But for the men in the street, whenever they think of borrowing, they will think that there will be a cost of borrowing. And this cost may be passed on to users, you know. So if we upgrade the train lines, will that come in the form of higher train fares? So how do we assure that we have fiscal sustainability and yet not too, hunkered down and worried about borrowing costs?
Right. Well, Annie, thank you for the question. I think, as Finance Minister, the one question that keeps me awake all the time is how do we ensure that we are fiscally sustainable? I'm very grateful as Finance Minister that I inherited a very good situation, and in particular, very grateful to our founding fathers for leaving us with these reserves. So in the earlier years, we accumulated the reserves, and now the net investment returns contribution is the largest component of our revenue. More than GST, more than corporate income tax, more than personal income tax. What it means is that if we had not had that, I would have to double any of these components, and it's still not enough. So we need some proper principles of safeguarding our financial position, our fiscal position, so that we are responsible not only to this generation but to future generation. So in the case of infrastructure projects, they, once built, we hope that it lasts us for many, many years. And the question is, what is a fair way of funding it? Is it fair and efficient to get current taxpayers to get everybody to pay up for this infrastructure? The answer is no, because each generation ought to pay for it. And what is the best way of doing it? After looking at various options, I think the best way is that we get the entity that is operating it to borrow and take a loan, but to lower the cost of that borrowing, we provide a government guarantee, and in that way the cost of borrowing will be lower and everybody benefits. Now, indeed, what you mentioned about the infrastructure projects, whether it is building Changi T5 or building our MRT lines, the capital expenditure is, it's not possible to recoup all the capital expenditure from users. Yeah. In fact, if we strive at the very least to cover some of the operating expenses. So the question about this fairness and intergenerational equity is very important for us. So by this borrowing, we hope that projects are planned very, very carefully, because now the operating entities will have to have financial discipline and to run it well. Because for the infrastructure to serve us well for many years, we cannot just build and let it run on its own. We got to build, we got to maintain, we got to upgrade, we have to renew. And I think the operating entities must take this very seriously and do this well. At the same time, we put in some borrowing to help them for the long run.
I think on the flip side as well, there are concerns that perhaps we are being too conservative, and this is something that you've heard about in budgets prior as well, especially when, like you said, the government has been really prudent on this front. Cho Wei Hao is an investment banker, and he shares such concerns. Wei Hao, please ask a question.
Mr. Heng, firstly, thanks for being here. So towards the end of your speech yesterday, you spoke about how the accumulated budget surplus was sufficient to cover the budget deficit for this year. And post that, some commentaries have emerged placing that number at approximately $15 billion after accounting for the budget deficit this year. And while we understand the need to be fiscally prudent, we also note that, the Singapore government runs a balanced budget for each term of government, and B, the current reserves and returns contribution are generally viewed as relatively prudent. So with that in mind, are you able to shed some light as to how the government plans to spend this $15 billion and whether more can be done maybe this year to address some of the concerns that the floor has raised today? Thank you.
Well, I think first it is very important to appreciate that we are a very small open economy, and some of the surpluses that we get come from unexpected developments. So it is, in a way, a good news. So, for instance, we collected more stamp duty last year because there were more property transactions. We had higher stat board contributions because financial markets were doing better last year. Now, these are one-off events, and we cannot plan our budget on the basis that, there will be some good luck, because there will also be years where it's the other way around. So we have been fortunate that in the last few rounds, we have always had a better upturn, a better result than we expected at the beginning of the year. And what is very important to recognize too is that when we have that surplus, at the end of the term of the government, any surplus will then be locked into the past reserves. And the past reserves are then invested for our people. And today, as I mentioned earlier, the net investment return contribution forms the largest component, the single biggest source of revenue for our budget. And therefore, it is a way of us, it is not as if the money got locked up and you never see it again. But it is a way for us to then use it in a much more sustainable way to flow back for future users. So I think it is an important principle of how we do not think of the budget just from year to year or even from generation to generation, but we'll think about it in a fair way for this generation and for future generations. And that I'm sure that we want Singapore to continue to be vibrant and viable in the long run for our children and our children's children. So this is how we think about how we use. It doesn't mean that, we have this surplus, so therefore let's go and splurge it tomorrow. In fact, if our founding fathers had taken that approach, we would not even have 1 cent of this net investment return contribution to talk about. And we will not be talking about increasing GST from 7 to 9%. It will be much more. But for recurrent expenditure, we must be disciplined about it. So for recurrent expenditure, this is something, meaning that it is something that will happen year after year. To take better care of the healthcare of our people, to take better care of our children, to continue to reshape the economy, transform the economy. Those expenditure, we all benefit from it, and therefore it's important that the current generation is responsible and pays for it.
People are also going to look at this $15 billion that has to be, not has to be spent before the end of the current term of government, but are cognizant that we have this spare amount, and will be wondering how this will drive election strategy. I mean, election strategy, the elections have to be called by 2021. Right. Some people have said it's going to be called earlier. Do you envision this amount to go towards that on that front?
No, I think first and foremost, the budget is a very, as I mentioned earlier on, it's really a strategic plan to allocate resources for Singapore to remain, successful, vibrant in the long run, and to be fair across generation. So it is not about, okay, we are near the election, therefore let's spend this and let's spend that. And as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't mean that next year we're going to spend that 15 billion. That if the economy does much better, and all of us are better, and I collect a lot more taxes, and we, instead of a deficit, that we have a surplus, I think all of us will be very happy. right? Not just me who is collecting more taxes. It must mean that our companies are doing better, our workers are doing better, and people are paying more personal income tax, consumers are spending more, and we're collecting more GST, and that, whether it's property transactions and so on.
What would you say to those people who look at, for example, this year's budget and say, hey, this looks like an election budget?
Well, if they mean that they are very happy with the budget, then I'll say, well, then it's good, But I don't plan on that basis because I think we have a responsibility to our future generation, and that, as I said, it's not possible for one budget to tackle A to Z. It's not possible, right? There will always be more priority. In fact, I have many meetings with the various ministries and various ministers before the budget, and every time I start with a very long list of requests, and I have to cut it down, across, and then we'll decide on what are the priorities, and I discuss with the Prime Minister that what are the priorities that we ought to spend on, and how we need to do this well. So this is the way that we plan our budget, and I must say that let us maintain that. I didn't have to talk about, dealing with climate change. It is a problem that many countries are postponing. But I think for us, it's an important enough challenge, and that the earlier we prepare, the better it is. I don't have to talk about, I don't have to think about doing unpopular policies on workers. But it is really, when you look further down the road, the question is that the path for us to get into, or given that we know that this is not the right path, we should begin to switch now, even though it is harder, but that will land us in a better place in the coming years.
So when you raised the issue of climate change earlier and how we're tackling this issue now, of course you made changes to the diesel duties as well.
Yes.
Do you foresee that having a very significant impact on Singapore's efforts to fight climate change?
Well, it will be important, not just for climate change, but in the case of diesel, it is also for the healthcare of our people. Some European countries have even completely banned diesel because of the health effects. Because the emissions is not just about carbon dioxide, but it is also other forms which are not good for health. So it's important for us to continue with this push. And I'm glad that companies and individuals are responding to this change. So for those who are having diesel vehicles today, I have provided quite a substantial offset package in order to help them cope with this change. But I hope that in the coming years, we will all change our behavior in order that we can keep Singapore, keep a high quality of life in Singapore. This is really about our people and our people's health and about our children.
Minister, thank you very much for sharing those insights with us this evening. I'm sure the audience, both here and at home, appreciate that greatly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being an excellent audience. Thank you for the engaging questions, some even rather tough questions for the Finance Minister. And on that note, we've come to the end of the show. Thanks for staying with us. Good night.